A police officer threw away a black man's passport, mocking his insignificance, unaware that this man was his new boss. This moment upended the lives of everyone involved, exposing the depths of racism and brutal injustice. What happened next will shock even the most seasoned observers. But let's start from the beginning. The airport was crowded. Long lines, crying children, and weary faces everywhere. Police officer Charles Whitman was lazily inspecting documents, his face marked by irritation. A 40-year veteran of the force, Charles was notorious for his harsh demeanor and disdain for passengers, particularly those whose appearances struck him as suspicious. The line moved forward, and a tall black man in a sharp suit approached the counter. His confident movements and friendly smile stood in stark contrast to the tense atmosphere. Without saying a word, he handed over his passport. Charles glanced at the document, noting that it belonged to a citizen from West Africa. His eyebrows shot up. "Another one," Charles grumbled loudly, not bothering to hide his disdain. "You think your passport means anything? In this country, it's just a worthless piece of paper." The man calmly met his gaze. "This document is recognized worldwide. You have no right to treat me this way," he said evenly. Charles laughed derisively. "I'm the one who decides what happens here, not you." With exaggerated disdain, he tossed the passport into the nearest trash bin. "Go complain to someone if you can." The line froze. People watched the passenger's humiliation in silence. Some pulled out their phones to record the scene, but the man remained composed. He didn't argue. Instead, he said in a cold tone, "You'll regret this." "Oh, is that a threat?" Charles snapped back. "Get lost before I detain you." Without another word, the man turned and walked confidently toward the exit. Charles sneered at his retreating figure and muttered to his colleagues, "They're all the same. Proud until you remind them who's in charge." But Charles had no idea that this was no ordinary passenger. In just a few hours, this incident would become the first link in a chain of events that would upend his career and his life forever. The next morning, the police station buzzed with excitement. Everyone was talking about the arrival of the new chief. "They say he's strict but fair," whispered the staff. Charles, lazily sipping his coffee, just scoffed. "Another theorist. Let's see how long he lasts." By lunchtime, a crowd had gathered at the entrance of the building. A sleek black SUV with diplomatic plates glided up, catching everyone's attention. Out stepped the same man in the sharp suit whom Charles had mocked the day before. The officers froze in stunned silence as they recognized him. Charles, on the other hand, remained oblivious, engrossed in recounting the funny incident from the previous day to his colleagues. The man walked confidently into the building, appearing to pay no attention to Charles. In the conference room, the officer stood at attention as he took his place at the head of the table. The man surveyed the room and then smiled. "Good morning. My name is James Adebayo, and I am your new chief." Charles froze. His face turned pale as the realization hit him. This was the same man he had humiliated yesterday. James continued, "I understand that this department has faced issues with discipline and respect toward the public. This is unacceptable. We will start by addressing the most glaring violations." His gaze landed squarely on Charles, piercing him like a dagger. "Some of you will have to explain your actions." After the meeting, James summoned Charles to his office. Charles walked in, trying to maintain a confident demeanor. "Is there something you'd like to say?" James began coldly. "It was a misunderstanding, sir," Charles stammered. "I was just doing my job." James raised a hand, cutting him off. "Yesterday, you humiliated a man, violated international protocols, and jeopardized the reputation of this department. This will be investigated, and the consequences will reflect the gravity of your actions." Charles stared at him silently, feeling the ground slip out from beneath his feet. James concluded, "One last thing. I hope you'll reflect on your behavior and make the necessary changes. If not, termination will be the least of your concerns." As Charles left the office, he felt the stares of his colleagues burn into him. The air of invincibility he once wore so confidently was gone. This was just the beginning of a chain of events that would alter everything. In the days that followed, tension in the precinct reached a boiling point. James Adebayo launched a series of reforms, organizing meetings with staff and conducting inspections. He listened to everyone, from desk clerks to rookie officers. Charles's colleagues, who had previously stayed silent out of fear of his aggressive demeanor, began to speak up about his misconduct. Not only did the incident with the passport come to light, but numerous instances of Charles abusing his authority were revealed. Under growing scrutiny, Charles tried to maintain his composure, but his frustration boiled over. In the smoking area, he vented to the few allies he had left. "This is a witch hunt. That new guy just wants to make me the scapegoat." But his situation only worsened. Security footage from the airport, capturing his actions with the passport, became key evidence in the investigation. The video leaked online and quickly went viral. Public outrage erupted, with protests forming outside the police station, demanding justice. James, responding to the crisis, addressed the press. "We are committed to ensuring that law enforcement serves every citizen without bias. An internal investigation is underway, and any actions that violate our values will be met with appropriate consequences." Desperate, Charles attempted to bribe a few colleagues into supporting him, but this only hastened his downfall. Now, not only was he accused of discrimination, but also of attempted manipulation. Finally, at a general meeting, James delivered the verdict. "We have concluded that Senior Officer Charles Whitman violated ethical standards and discredited this department. Effective immediately, he is relieved of duty, and disciplinary proceedings will commence." The room fell silent as everyone watched Charles surrender his badge and walk out. He was no longer the fearsome officer he had once been, but a broken man who would now face the consequences of his actions. Meanwhile, James pressed forward with his reforms, introducing bias training programs and bringing in independent experts to guide the process. His efforts became a symbol of transformation, and the police station emerged as a model for a new approach to law enforcement. After Charles's dismissal, the ripple effects were felt far beyond the precinct. The media covered the story extensively, turning it into a symbol of the fight against systemic discrimination. James Adebayo became a hero in the eyes of the public, but he knew his work was far from over. Meanwhile, Charles sank deeper into despair. He had lost not only his job, but also the respect of his family and friends. Legal charges were filed against him, and public condemnation became his constant shadow. One day, as he left his house, he noticed graffiti on a nearby wall. "You represent the past, but change is inevitable." For the first time in a long while, those words made him reflect. At the precinct, the winds of change were blowing. James introduced anonymous reporting systems, allowing officers to report discrimination and misconduct without fear of retaliation. During one meeting, he addressed the team. "Our mission is not just to protect citizens, but to set an example for them. Respect and equality are not optional. They are our duty." A shift began to take hold among the staff. Those who had once upheld toxic practices started changing their behavior under the weight of the new standards. Younger officers, who had previously been too intimidated to speak up, began sharing their ideas openly. The culmination of James's reforms came when he invited community leaders and activists to a public forum to discuss the precinct's transformation. The meeting took place in a large hall filled with officers, city residents, and members of the press. One activist stood up and said, "This case has shown us that change is possible. Now we hope you won't stop halfway." James responded firmly, "We are committed to earning your trust. Every step we've taken is aimed at building a system where there is no room for bias." Amidst these events, Charles unexpectedly appeared at the precinct doors. He requested a meeting with James. Their conversation was brief, but meaningful. "I wanted to apologize," Charles said, lowering his gaze for the first time. "I understand now that I was wrong. Recognition is the first step," James replied. "But to truly change the past, you must work toward a better future." The story concluded with the precinct becoming a model for progressive reform. James Adebayo proved that meaningful change is possible when approached with determination and consistency. As for Charles, though broken, he began to understand the depth of his mistakes and the need to reflect on the person he had been.